Welcome to this episode of Out of the Best Books, the podcast where we deep dive into classic literature and have conversations about what we've learned and discovered along the way. We love all things books and reading, and we want to share our love of the classics with you. We hope to inspire you to read along with us and join in the conversation. I'm Laura.
And I'm Amity. Let's get started.
Woohoo! It's a new book today.
A new book after spending many weeks, many needed and deserved weeks on Far from the Madding Crowd and some bonus episodes. We're now jumping into another classic, a children's classic, which we love. And this one is The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. Just a little bit of sort of background on it. And I think probably and we'll give even more background, right? Because we'll talk about Kenneth Grahame and everything. But this was first published in 1908. So it definitely passes the test of being a classic. It's been around and been, it's never been out of print that I'm aware of. It's been in print for well over 100 years, 115 years at this point. That is pretty amazing. In the copy of the book that I have, there's actually an introduction by Brian Jacques, which I love because he is the pretty well-known author of the Redwall series. And I think that he probably got a lot of his inspiration for Redwall from Wind in the Willows. So that's kind of a fun little side note. Anyway.
Yeah. So I read that this was written. So him and his wife had one son, and the son had either health issues or some kind of issue, right? Growing up. And so him and his wife were going somewhere, and he wrote these stories as bedtime stories that he would send home to be read to his son while they were away. So I thought that was really cute, but
I love that. Yeah, that's really sweet. And then it came together to be just this incredible classic. And really, Winnie the Pooh is sort of in the same vein also, because it was A.A. Milne telling stories to his son, who I believe was named Christopher Robin. Anyways, we'll have to do Winnie the Pooh.
It also reminds me, what's that book? It was the same thing. The father was telling his kids stories, and the kids were like, "You have to write a book." The Ember, is it Ember City?
The Green Ember.
The Green Ember.
Yes. Yeah. And that was really a fun book too. We read that a few years ago. I might have to pick it up and read it to the kids again, because I don't think that the younger kids would remember it. But
yeah, so maybe a lot of children's literature like this has started as just purely we're telling our kids stories, and the kids are like, this is good.
Yeah, I agree. And it's kind of interesting that a lot of those kind come from male authors.
Yes.
Like the female authors write these just beautiful, wonderful stories, and it's great, but you don't really necessarily hear about those being originally bedtime stories or something.
Yeah.
But a lot of the classic children's that are written by males, turns out they were originally bedtime stories. So
dads, I think, well, in our family, dads are way better at telling stories.
I agree. They're all about like the fighting and the adventure and the like doing crazy things. So
and anyway. I tell them stories about cleaning the house. They don't
cleaning the house and doing kind things for your neighbor.
Not as exciting. Another interesting thing I thought was that Mr. Toad's Wild Ride at Disneyland is based off of this story. And another funny thing is that they think that The Wind in the Willows was a really weird title, since the word willows never appears in the book.
That is true. And that's something that I have thought about a lot, because I'm always wondering about titles. A lot of time, most of the time, they make a lot of sense. Sometimes you have to like sort of dig a little bit, like Far from the Madding Crowd, to like understand the meaning. And then you're like, oh, that makes great sense. For The Wind in the Willows, I was like, well, we'll talk about it a lot, but it's a beautiful nature book. Like it really digs in, and it shows you his great appreciation and love and interest in nature. and you can't escape that part. But yeah, there's never a time that it talks about wind in the willows or necessarily, well, there it does talk about wind, but
He talks about a few times it says willow, like a singular willow, but it
sure.
never talks about the anyways, I just thought that was kind of funny. But and going into this, I mean, I'm not like you with classic literature, so I had like no idea what we were gonna be reading. So it's kind of interesting. It reminded me of like, is it Frog and Toad? Those books.
Yeah,
In the
totally.
beginning. Yeah.
And I would be interested to see if like Frog and Toad sort of
Came from this.
came
That's what I
from
was
this.
thinking.
Yeah. There's so many books that are spin-offs of classics. Well, it's just interesting too, like how many of these books written in England at the turn of the 20th century, and they have all these animal hero characters. They just become classic. So I'm thinking about Wind in the Willows, Winnie the Pooh, but also Beatrix Potter and all of her beautiful books, all the Peter Rabbit series. And yeah, it's just kind of interesting to think
Yeah.
about like what was going maybe it was like kind of a form of escapism. They're like, people suck. We're gonna write about animals.
Well, and it's funny because these animals are like people.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
And what's so interesting in this book is how the animals and the people live side by side.
Yes.
And you don't get that as much in the first half, but definitely in the second half, there's a lot of it. And so we'll get into that. But
Okay. So in this, and then I feel like there are a bunch of little short stories. Like he was writing these bedtime stories home, right? There's kind of a thread through it, but they're each chapter is a little story, but there's four main characters. So we have Mole, Rat, Toad, and Badger. They are I believe, and then we've got Otter too, but anyways, I think we should talk about the first four. So Mole is young and he's kind of like a coming of age throughout the story, right? So he's kind of the newcomer, right? At first, he finds he'd never seen a river before. He comes and is introduced to it and all the people around or the animals around. And at first he's like impulsive and he needs to be taught. He's kind of learning from the other animals that have lived along the river all this time. And he's really loyal to his friend Rat. And he gets better and better. He just gets more polite. He gets more like, I think at times he questions like their motives in telling him to do things. And then eventually he's like, oh, they're telling me that for my own good. I better listen. Anyways, so basically he leaves his underground home and finds Rat, and Rat invites him to live with him. And then he becomes part of their little group, I guess. And Rat's
yeah,
roommate.
yeah. And that really is like the beginning of everything. It's like Mole has emerged from underground. He's never even seen the light before, really, is what we get the idea. And so in that way, it really is like a coming of age story, isn't it?
And he likes the light.
He does.
Yeah.
Yeah. He loves his home, but he does love the light. So yeah, he's a great little character. I really like Mole. And then Rat. So Brian Jock in his introduction, he refers to Rat as like sort of like this really wonderful, admirable uncle character. And I think that's a good way of describing it. He's like a very mature, very good, solid character that you can rely on the whole time. And he's not perfect by any means. Like he's really not. Like he has his moments that you're like, what are you doing? But he's very kind. He's very thoughtful. There's a time that we're going to talk about that like Mole is really sad and he just thinks that he needs to like brush that aside because Rat has ignored it. So he's like, well, if Rat doesn't think it's important, then it's probably not important. But Rat sees that he's sad. He finds out why. And then he figures it out and he goes with him and he's like, um, what's important to you is also important to me, and it takes a great amount of maturity to do that. Anyway, I like Rat. I think he's one of the heroes of the story.
Yeah, I mean, he's wealthy and he's respected.
Mhm.
And anyways, let's go into Toad. Oh, and I love that he's romantic and he's always writing poetry and
Yes.
so
Yeah,
funny.
he is.
Yeah, but Toad is the opposite. He's wealthy, but he inherited his wealth from his father.
Mhm.
And he's conceited, he's selfish, he's more wealthy than Rat. So he's extremely wealthy. He lives in Toad Hall, which is like a big, huge residence along the river, like I said, which he inherited. And he picks up expensive hobbies and then he casts them aside once he's done
Yeah.
with them. And these hobbies are dangerous and hurt other people or other animals. I'm going to say people, people, animals, that's interchangeable here. No.
Well, it is because, like I said, later on in the book, you're going to find that the people and the animals interact like a
Yeah.
lot. And so, but it does, it's like he hurts people and animals alike
With his
and
hobbies and his,
with his hobbies.
yeah.
And they most often also lead to him doing very illegal things, not just hurting people, but like doing things that are very illegal. But he's just like, devil may care what I wanted. He's extremely impulsive, has no impulse control
I
whatsoever.
think he's going to be like our Sergeant Troy.
He kind of is. Yeah, he kind of is, isn't he?
Okay, then why don't you tell us about Badger?
Okay, so Badger. Oh, I feel like I didn't do a good job with Rat. Another thing that I wanted to add about him, you mentioned that he is a pretty well-off animal. He's also very hardworking and he has lots of hobbies, but there are things like fishing and boating and things that take like skill and understanding. And he's very passionate. He loves the river. He loves the animals. He loves where he lives. He's just he's content. Uh, and yeah, he just has a good life and is hardworking, good guy. Anyways, so then we've got Badger, who I would say is like the grumpy old grandpa. And that's probably not fair to all the nice grandpas out there, but like he's kind of a grumpy old grandpa. He's somebody that he's very competent. He's very intelligent. He's been able to take good care of himself and establish things well for himself. Like his home is well taken care of, and he's somebody that everybody respects. Like even the dangerous creatures in the wild wood, which we'll talk about, they leave Badger alone. And you know that if you're with Badger, you're going to be safe. At the same time, he doesn't like put up with junk. He doesn't put up with bad behavior at all. And he's very assertive. And he has his definite ideas about things. And if you're doing things that he thinks is not a good idea, he will tell you, and very forcefully. So he's a good person. We're going to keep these anthropomorphic figures. We're just going to keep referring to them as people. So he's a good animal that you would always want in your corner. I
Yeah.
think always on your team.
Generous and he's like the other animals accept him, look over his problems because he's such a kind and generous animal.
Yeah.
And he'll help them with anything. And so there's things about him that maybe aren't perfect, but they're like, oh yeah, but and what's funny is the other animals give him a pass because he's
Mhm.
so wonderful, but they don't give Toad a pass because he doesn't have that side of him that's like,
Right.
you know,
Right. Well, because there is no part of him that's responsible or
yeah.
thoughtful or like there are good, like it even says in there, and others will talk well of him. They're like, oh, he's the kindest, softest hearted person you'll ever meet. Toad you'll ever meet. But he's also like just completely thoughtless at the same time and doesn't really care who he runs over. So
Literally.
yeah, literally.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so chapter 1, the riverbank. And this is where we're introduced to cute little Mole who has never left his neat and tidy little home. He's in the middle of spring cleaning. He's doing his whitewashing. And all of a sudden he feels like something is calling to him. And the word that they use is imperiously. So it's like, you can't ignore it. You have to go. So he follows the call and he digs up and his nose pokes up through the ground. And in that moment, his life is never the same. And he says, this is fine. This is better than whitewashing, as the sunshine just comes down and like bathes everything in light. Now, I do wonder how that works with moles being mostly blind, but I think they're ignoring that fact. Okay.
They probably can see light.
I think so. I think that's probably true.
Because we have a blind dog, and I'm pretty sure he only sees light.
Okay. He can still make his way around a little bit and maybe knows day from night.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's like walking along and he's going through the meadow, and we find out that like the rabbits are kind of shysters. They charge animals a toll for trying to like cross the meadow, go into the woods. And he's like, I'm not doing that. But anyway, I think that somehow he gets away from the rabbits. He's like rambling through the meadows and he just loves it. He sees all these things happening. Life is just going on all around him. And I love this quote. It says, the best part of a holiday, because he considers himself as being on a holiday, because he just left his work behind him. He's like, heck with spring cleaning, I'm going out. He said, the best part of a holiday is perhaps not so much to be resting yourself as to see all the other fellows busy working. And because that's what reminds you that you're not working, that you're on holiday, because everybody else is working. So I kind of love that. He's walking along and he sees the river for the first time and he's just kind of blown away by it. It's this phenomenon that he's never even imagined before. And as he's sitting there just watching the river, he sees sort of like this disturbance in the water, and a brown little face comes up and little whiskers, and after a time the entire face emerges and it is Water Rat. And so Rat and Mole meet for the very first time. And Rat is very kind and he immediately like makes friends with Mole and sees that he doesn't know very much. And so he starts teaching him, being right there with him. And one of Rat's very favorite things is going in boats. And he finds out that Mole has never been in a boat. And he's like, what have you been doing in your life if you've never been in a boat? Like, today is the day for you to actually start living. And Mole's like, well, are boats nice? And Rat says, nice. They are the only thing. There is nothing, absolutely nothing half so much worth doing as simply messing about in boats. Anyway, so they get in Rat's boat and he's like, oh, and I just happen to have a picnic lunch packed. So he goes and gets his picnic lunch. They jump in the boat and they start going down the river to find this wonderful little place that Rat goes to have their picnic.
I love what he says about when they're talking about the boats. He says, in or out of them, it doesn't matter. Nothing seems really to matter. That's the charm of it. Whether you get away or whether you don't, whether you arrive at your destination or whether you reach somewhere else, or whether you never get anywhere at all, you're always busy and you never do anything in particular. And when you've done it, there's always something else to do and you can do it if you like, but you'd much better not. Like, I just love that. Basically, this whole book is like about nature, right? And so the author is trying to tell us like it's better to immerse ourselves in nature than like do anything else. And our destination isn't the point.
Right.
Like it's the journey, right?
It really, yes. And I think that's such an important message. I'm so glad you brought that out because it's really true. And we can't learn anything about nature unless we're like really inhaling it and spending time in it and immersing ourselves in it. And you get the idea that that's exactly what the author did in order to write this book. He had to.
And like the idea that Rat is wealthy enough that he can spend his time doing that. So I mean, I think that too is like, there's a difference. Mole up to this point hadn't been able to do that because he
Yeah.
didn't have the, I don't want to say privilege, but you know what I mean? He didn't have
Yeah. And
the,
also just, he didn't have the knowledge. Like he didn't even know
yeah.
it was out there. And so I think that's an important lesson too, is like recognizing what's out there, like pulling ourselves away from our screens and our, the wear and tear of every day and all the sports and all the lessons and all the things, and just like spending time in nature and discovering that. Because until we do that, I don't know that we can really understand the value in it. Rat, he loves the river. And Mole asks him, "You really live by the river? What a jolly life." And Rat says, "I live in it and on it and with it. It's my world and I don't want any other. What it hasn't got is not worth having. And what it doesn't know is not worth knowing." And you might think, oh, well, that's kind of a closed-minded view, but it's also like having so much and being content with what you have, recognizing like your abundance and being like, and this is also enough. Like it's an incredible and full life and it's good. So then Rat introduces Mole to the wild wood. And he's like, well, we don't go there so much because that's where kind of the scary critters are. However, Badger does live there, and we love Badger. And that's where we kind of get the idea that even the very kind of creepy critters, the weasels and the stoats they talk about, they don't interfere with Badger. They respect him. They leave him pretty much alone.
Yeah, nobody interferes with him. They better not.
Yes. I love something too that goes on through here, and maybe we'll like make a list and post it on Instagram or something of all the animal etiquette that we learned through here, because it's really funny. And I kind of started to make a list and I think I skipped something, but one thing is it goes against animal etiquette to dwell on possible trouble ahead or even to allude to it. So you shouldn't be talking about the dangers that could happen. Yeah, you just kind of avoid those subjects. You don't talk about that.
Because I have highlighted beyond the wild wood comes the wide world. And that's something that doesn't matter. This is Rat speaking. And that's something that doesn't matter either to you or me. I've never been there and I'm never going, nor you either. If you've got any sense at all, don't ever refer to it again, please. So, yeah. So Rat thinks so adventures are great as long as they take place close to home.
Yes.
And Rat thinks it's foolish to go far away from home.
Yes, which is another thing that really separates him from Toad, because all Toad is ever trying to do is leave home.
Yes.
And do these crazy adventures and go out into the wide world. And Rat is like, no, on the other side of the wild wood is the wide world. We don't go there. Don't even think about going there, which is interesting. I don't know. I have to think about that. So anyway, they're just going along. They're seeing all these beautiful, wonderful things. Mole is just like starry-eyed at everything he's learning and discovering. And they sit down and start having their picnic. And that's when Otter arrives for the first time. He's out on the river and says hello. And Rat introduces him to Mole. And I love this because Rat introduces Otter to Mole, and Otter says, I'm proud to meet you, basically. And the two animals were friends forthwith. Like, that's all it took. They're just like, okay, now we know you. We can be friends. I love it. And that's when Badger shows up for the first time too. So we really are meeting quite a few of the characters right here in the very first chapter. Badger shows up and he's really funny. So he trots forward a pace or two. He grunts. He says, company. He turns his back and disappears from view. And Rat is just like, oh, well, that's him. He hates society. You know, that's where I'm like, he's really like this grumpy old grandpa who just wants to sit on his porch. He's like the secondhand lion, guys. If you remember that movie from
I
forever
haven't
ago.
seen it.
Oh, you haven't? Okay,
Mm.
so it's so funny. It's these two old guys who end up raising their like great nephew or something, and they're just like these grumpy old men, and yet they also have hearts of gold. They don't put up with traveling salesmen. They have like millions of dollars. And so there's these salesmen who are always trying to sell them something and they're just like, get away from me. But they're really like the sweetest men in the
Mm.
world.
I'll have to watch that
So
movie.
you
I've
will.
heard of it.
I think you would love it. It's so sweet. Anyway, and then they start talking about Toad. And this is really funny because they introduce it saying that Toad, he had a houseboat. So that was one of his hobbies. And he swore that he was going to live on a houseboat like for the rest of his days. And he like grabbed all of his friends and his friends were living on that houseboat with him. And then he grew tired of it. And Otter is sitting there. So he's like, he's such a good fellow. No stability. He's completely unstable. Here's another little piece of animal etiquette. It forbids any sort of comment on the sudden disappearance of one's friends at any moment for any reason or no reason whatsoever. So Otter had just disappeared and they're not supposed to say anything about it. Okay. So they're not supposed to, so far, they're not supposed to talk about the wide world. They're not supposed to talk about possible dangers ahead. And they're not supposed to talk about the sudden disappearance of one's friends. Just don't talk about that.
Could you
I think
imagine
it's so funny.
like that was one of our rules of etiquette? Like somebody just disappears and you're like, oh, we can't talk about it.
We don't talk about that. We don't talk about Bruno.
Yeah.
But and then we get into Mole has packed up the lunch, which was quite the
Quite
undertaking.
elaborate.
Yes, it was like it had to be just so for everything to fit into the basket. And it was a very, like you say, elaborate lunch to begin with. And they get into the boat, and Mole has decided that he wants to be able to row. And Rat is like, absolutely, but you need a few lessons first, you know? And it's one of those things like anytime I just remember watching the Olympics as a kid, and whether it was ice skating or gymnastics, I was like, it was so amazing, but they're so good that they make it look easy,
Yeah.
you
You're
know?
like, I could do
So you
that.
think you're like, I'm going to be a gymnast or I'm going to be an ice skater, you know, a figure skater. And you go to try ice skating, especially for the first time, and good grief, you're like, well, never mind. Throw
I
that to the
am.
wind.
I am pretty sure I could be a curler.
I bet you could. That would be
Okay.
awesome. So, but the thing is that Rat had made rowing the boat look so easy that Mole was like, "Oh, I'm sure I can do it." And this is where you realize that Mole is very naive. He's very childlike, and Rat is he is sort of the mature older uncle. And so Mole does get behind the oars. He kind of takes them over, and it is so reckless and uncoordinated that he ends up tipping the boat over. And Rat saves him. He pulls him out of the water. Mole thinks he's going to drown, but he doesn't because Rat saves him. But here's what I love. Mole had totally screwed up. He took it over. He did something that he was told, no, you're not ready to do this. Was very impetuous, very impulsive, and ended up almost killing them. But instead of being like, see, I told you, so why did you do that? Why did you do that? Instead, it was like Rat knew that Mole already knew. So he didn't scold him. He didn't say, well, maybe next time you'll listen to me. He dried him off and made sure he was okay. He was like, I need to go find the luncheon basket because it's in the water. And he kind of waited for Mole. And when Mole was ready, he totally apologized. He was like, I am so sorry. And Rat was like, oh, that's all right. Bless you. What's a little wet to a water rat? Like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I'm going to teach you how to row. And how much more open is Mole going to be to learning from Rat all the way along? Now that he knows that he's safe to make a mistake. And this was like a really big, stupid mistake. But he made it, and he was still safe with Rat. He was like, it's okay. You learned, and now I'm gonna really teach you.
Yeah, and like Mole is like he's the character that learns from his mistakes,
Mhm.
is apologetic,
Yes.
and Rat is forgiving.
Yeah.
And he laughs as he's pulling Mole out of the river. Like he's
Yeah.
like, and I sometimes I think like that. I don't know, like my husband will, I'll do something that will cause a problem. I don't know, maybe knock something over, like,
Yeah.
something little. I'm like, I'm so sorry. And he was always like, oh, it's fine. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yes.
I don't know.
To be able to sort of take a higher view of things and be like, what really matters and what doesn't.
Yeah.
And to be like, I trust that you are mature enough that you're going to learn from this
Yeah.
without me having to say that, So,
Yeah. And Mole wants to learn too. So he's
yes.
like, he learns from his mistakes and he's willing to pay it to learn from the other animals who are teaching him. So
Yes.
I love it.
Yeah. So really great first chapter. And this, like I said, the very last paragraph of this chapter, it kind of like tells you, okay, this was the first day of many similar ones to follow. This is like the beginning of the journey for Mole.
Yeah.
Okay, this is where it all starts. So that leads us to chapter 2.
Awesome. Okay. So chapter 2. So Rat and Mole decide that they're going to go visit Toad by boat. So Mole is rowing, which isn't, so he must have learned how to row. Rat is explaining about Toad to Mole as they're going, that he's really a good guy. He's conceited, but he has some good qualities. And this is funny, when they get to the boathouse, it looks deserted. So that must be how we know that he has deserted the hobby of the boathouse, right? There's nothing there, nobody
Right.
there. Rat says to Toad, he must have given up boating, and who knows what his newest hobby is going to be.
What's next?
Yeah, he said, boating is played out. He's tired of it and done with it. I wonder what new fad he's taken up now. Come along and let's look him up. We shall hear all about it quite soon enough. So he's like, he's going to tell us. Yeah, and so that's the contrast there, that Mole is willing to listen. He's now rowing, so he's learned. And then Toad is not. He's conceited and thinks he knows everything. So they find Toad resting in the garden, and Toad jumps up. He's never met Mole before, but he jumps up without being introduced to him. He says that he was going to send for them. He wants them to have a meal with him. And Mole notices that this house is very nice. And Toad even comments that his own house is the nicest house on the river. So there you go. Conceited example number 1. And at that time, Rat nudges Mole like, see, I told you.
Yeah.
Toad turns red because
let's see. Oh, yes, you're right. Yeah, it's Toad that turns very red because it's like, oh,
yeah,
they know what I'm doing.
Yeah, and he says, well, it's just how I am.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like the fact is that Toad immediately proved Rat's point.
About everything.
Yes, every time. And even though he's embarrassed by his behavior, he's not going to change it. So like he notices that they're talking about him, and he's like, yeah, that's just how I am. So Toad says that he wants to talk to Rat, and Rat assumes it's about rowing, but Toad says, no. I've moved on from boating. We're on a new hobby now. And what is his new hobby? It's hilarious. They call it a gypsy. So he takes Rat and Mole out to the stable, and he brings out this, what they call a gypsy caravan, which I would think is like a camper, right?
Yeah, I get the idea. It's sort of like, what you would imagine a like a snake oil salesman back in the day, driving those little wagons that, it's completely like a box wagon type of thing. And they're able to live inside and
Yeah.
have all their wares inside. And it's very brightly colored and painted. And
this one is bright
things.
yellow.
Yeah.
And he tells him this caravan, it represents real life. And he'll be able to go out and see the whole world in it. And it has everything we need in it. Even a caged bird. Because that is what we need.
That's what we need.
And he's like,
be real life without a caged bird.
Yeah. And he's like, and good news, we're all leaving this afternoon.
Yeah.
I
was going to send for you because you're going with me on this crazy adventure.
Yes. And he, Toad is like offending them because he's saying boating is a waste of time and they love boating. And so Toad he doesn't care that he's offending him because Rat is, what did he say in the last chapter? It's the only thing worth doing.
Yeah.
And now Toad's like, So, and he's entitled. Toad is entitled. He just thinks they'll just go with him.
And that they should, because this is the best thing. He's decided it's the best thing. So
yeah. And he doesn't
of course, everybody else. No.
He just says you're going. So Rat says, I'm not going. But Toad's like, please, please, please come. And Mole agrees. Like, he wants to go, but he's like, I think he's loyal to Rat. So he's like, I'll just stay back with you.
He's very loyal to Rat and he'll do whatever he says. But at the same time, again, Rat is this very mature, good guy. And so he's like, well, Mole wants to go. So I guess I'll go along.
Yeah, he sees his face and he's like, oh, he really does want to go. So they're loyal to each other, right?
Yes.
So Toad suggests that they have lunch and they talk about it. He kind of is seeing that Mole is young and inexperienced. And so he starts telling him basically tales of his adventures. And eventually
I think he sees that he's easy to manipulate because he's still pretty naive. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And so it's just throughout lunch, it's just assumed that they're all going to go. And Rat he doesn't want to disappoint both Toad and Mole. And so he agrees to go. So at one point, Toad says that the trip will make an animal out of Rat. And that is kind of like people saying you're going to make a man out of somebody.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, he thinks they're like children and he's going to take them out into the adult world.
Yes. Because he thinks he knows so much. Yeah. It's one of those classic, like, somebody has a lot of money and so they immediately decide that they are better and smarter and wiser than everybody else.
Yeah.
Especially in this case, Toad inherited his money.
Yep.
And he is probably the least smart or experienced or wise of anybody.
Yeah.
So
Toad tells Rat and Mole that they need to go capture the old gray horse who doesn't want to be caught. And Toad is packing some supplies. So then they leave on their trip and people passing by are complimenting their gypsy caravan. Which is kind of funny.
yes.
I can imagine this thing like this. I'm thinking about this rickety old thing that's driving down the dirt roads. So in the evening, they pull over to eat dinner. The stars come out and Toad is talking about what they're going to do in the next few weeks. And then they all go to bed. And Toad says, this is the life for a gentleman. And now that Toad is asleep or down, now Rat is allowed to talk about the river. So he must have been controlling them and we're just talking about our trip right now. We're not going to talk about the river. Rat says that he thinks about the river all the time. So he's not happy about being on this. And then Mole, also being loyal to Rat, grabs his paw and says, well, let's just go back home tomorrow. I feel bad that we're on this trip. You know how you make a decision and then feel remorse later, oh, maybe they're on this trip and they're like, oh, maybe this wasn't a good idea. I miss home.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's what it reminded me of. Yeah.
Totally.
And then they're like, they decide they can't go home because Toad is not safe by himself. So
Yeah, I think that they're realizing if we left him, we would have a lot of guilt because
he'd get himself into trouble.
he's stupid. He would get himself in so much trouble. But it's interesting that Rat is like, it's not going to take very long for this fad to pass. They all pass.
Well, they feel like they have to babysit Toad. Like
totally.
Somebody out here. And which tells us they're not seen as, like, Rat doesn't see himself as an equal with Toad.
Yeah.
Above him. So in the morning, Toad doesn't want to wake up, of course. And so Rat and Mole get up and do all the chores. They take care of the horse. They do the dishes from the night before. They walk to the village to get breakfast because Toad didn't bring enough food.
Yeah.
Again. And then when they get back, Toad's like, oh, life on the road is so easy. Rat and Mole had been doing all the hard work all morning.
Yeah. After all the hard work is done.
Yes. So then later that night, Rat and Mole, they make Toad do his share of the work. And now he doesn't feel the same way as about life on the road. He's like, this isn't what I thought it was this morning. Rat and Mole, they're pretty well off. They have money, but they understand that dishes don't wash themselves and like food doesn't just appear out of nowhere, which Toad doesn't understand.
Yeah, somehow he's missed that. They don't really talk about it, but it does make you go, okay, he totally has an entire staff at Toad Hall. Absolutely,
Yes.
he does.
And he thinks things just magically get done or appear,
Yeah, which is why he has no sense of responsibility, no sense of what consequences are.
This reminded me of like, I wrote down, is that why he invited them on the trip? Because he knew that they would do the things that he didn't want to do. And I was thinking, have you ever, sometimes I'll like invite I don't know, like my mom's going to be like, what? But, like invite your mom to go somewhere because they'll help you like with the kids or, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, not so I can lay in bed and drink hot cocoa and watch movies.
Right.
But
so I mean? There's like extra hands.
Yeah. Just reminded me of that. Like, oh yeah, sometimes I'm like, oh, if I invite this person on the trip, there'll be less work. No, not true. So that next day, Mole is walking up by the horse. Oh my gosh, this is so funny. And Rat and Toad are walking behind. I keep writing the car, but it's not the car. The
caravan,
which
it's like a wagon.
A horse is pulling it, right?
Yeah.
So, and Rat is pretending to listen to Toad, and Toad is talking incessantly about nothing. And then I just love the words they use for the car noise are really funny. They see a cloud of dust and they hear a poop poop. That's the word that they use throughout the whole book. Poop,
throughout the whole book.
Yes. Boop, boop. And something drives past them, turns around in front of them, and scares the horse. And the caravan ends up in the ditch.
Yeah.
And Rat is yelling at the driver, threatening to drag him through the courts and, because he was driving so rudely. And Toad is in the middle of the road saying, poop, 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 poop. And he is like so happy that he's in this car.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So
yeah, he doesn't care that this caravan, which he was just going to travel the world in, is now just lying in the ditch
on its
toppled over, totally destroyed. And Rat is just like livid, and he's just sitting in the middle of the road.
I know.
Like, and it's funny, such a toddler.
When I was reading it, I was like, poop, poop. And then I listened to it and I was like, oh, the way the narrator said it, it's kind of funny. Poop, poop. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, one thing, I guess I can't say it. The horse is considered lower class because he wasn't asked to go on the trip, but Mole has empathy for the lower class animals. And that's why he was up walking with the horse.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. So Mole is treating the horse as an equal, basically. The car's first appearance in the story is scary and violent. And, again that Rat is mad about the rudeness, and Toad doesn't even notice.
Mhm.
So Mole then calms the horse down because he was spooked. And the caravan is damaged, and Mole and Rat can't get it out of the ditch by themselves. But Toad is sitting in the middle of the road going poop poop. They ask him for help, and he doesn't move. He just sits there, keeps saying poop poop. And then finally, Rat runs over and shakes him. Like, Rat shakes Toad, and he says he's seen the poetry of motion. This is Toad talking, right? Before this, I didn't know the possibilities. Like, I didn't know how that there was this kind of a invention, right? Or maybe they knew about it, but he'd never seen one or something.
Yeah.
So Mole is worried about how Toad is acting, but Rat's like, there's nothing we can do. He's possessed.
Yeah.
And he'll probably be like this for a few days.
Yeah.
He'll probably be like this for a while. Rat says there's nothing we can do. Toad is possessed, and he'll probably be like this for a few days, and he's going to be useless. So they know him. They know his pattern.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen. So Rat grabs the bird in the cage and the horse, and then he takes Mole down the road to get help. And Mole is worried about leaving Toad there, but Rat's like, he's so mad. He doesn't care. Like, kind of like, well, if something happens to him, whatever.
Yeah. Let him rot at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Toad, I think he realizes what's going on and runs up behind him. Rat tells Toad that he needs to file a complaint against the driver with the police, and that they're gonna need to go back to town and try to get help with the caravan. And Rat and Mole are gonna go get rooms at the inn. And Toad says, I could never complain about a car. And now he's done with carts. And so he's discovered cars, and he can't wait to throw all the carts into the ditch as he's zooming by them in his car.
Yeah. So he's wanting to give the same treatment to any other cart, the thing that he was praising wildly before. Now he's going to push them all into the ditch with his new motor car.
So I was wondering, like, is there anything you can think of that you've ditched for something new and better? Like, I think about it, but
okay, something that immediately comes to mind is very much technology. And I don't know, like, myself per se. Well, I think we all do, but the latest phones, like you get the newest phone, you're like, ew, nobody has a flip phone. Like, for the longest time, my kids were like, we want a phone. And I was like, sure, I am happy to get you a flip phone. They were like, no, they would rather.
It's worse than not having a phone.
It's worse than not having a phone. Exactly. And I feel like that's kind of similar. It's like, okay, why are you coming off so snotty like that? Like, you don't have a phone at all, and yet but you're too good for a flip phone.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Oh, we had that situation when we got the kids they're like a community flip phone, and they were like, no. I was just thinking about, like, I've just moved from like Word to Google Docs. I know I'm a little late to this party, but
the thing is, anymore, you have to pay for Word.
Yeah.
Like, and so that to me is kind of a big turnoff. I'm like, who wants to? And Google Docs is free.
And it's like, you can access it from anywhere. I'm just like, oh my gosh, Google Docs, where have you been my whole life?
Yeah.
No, the kids have been using it for years. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Google Docs and Sheets and Slides and Drive and all of it. So
totally. Okay. So this is the very end. So Rat says that when they get back to town, they're going to take a train back to the river. They drop Toad in the station waiting area and leave the horse at the inn, and then arrange for some. So they're like just taking care of all the little, Toad's useless. They're taking care of all the little details. They catch the train and take Toad back to Toad Hall. And then Rat and Mole make it home in time for dinner. And The next evening, Rat tells Mole that Toad has just bought a big, expensive car. So,
Yep.
basically, Toad isn't experiencing any of the consequences of being not helpful and selfish because Rat just swoops in and like takes care of everything for him. So,
Yeah.
but Rat thinks this is what he should do.
Yeah, he thinks it's what he should do. And maybe in a way he's feeling like he's protecting Mole, or it's just, but it's also one of those things that when you are a person who is responsible, you have a hard time stepping back and being like, hey, this person needs to feel their consequences and they need to, have a punishment for being irresponsible. But if you're a responsible person, you're going to take care of all the stuff that's connected with you in any way. So
Yeah.
I thought that I have about Toad, he's not a mystery, at all. He's probably the most shallow character in all of this because everybody knows exactly what he's going to. Once you have talked to him for 5 minutes, you know everything you need to know about him, which is sad. But yeah, you know what he's going to do in any given situation and how he's going to react. And they can predict what he's going to do.
Yeah. The one quote I did highlight was when after the accident with the caravan, and he says, "What dust clouds?" He's talking about what he's going to do to other carts as he drives by them.
Yeah.
What dust clouds shall spring up behind me as I speed on my reckless way? What carts I shall fling carelessly into the ditch in the wake of my magnificent onset? Horrid little carts, common carts, canary-colored carts.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yes. He sees harming others as extra entertainment.
Yeah.
As he drives by. He's like, going fast in the car isn't enough. I gotta make sure all the carts fall off into the ditch. And anyways.
Yeah, he is kind of the ultimate narcissist, I think.
Yeah.
Because everybody around is there to serve him.
Yeah.
And for his enjoyment or to dispose of as he sees fit. And life is just about him being able to find joy. But it's not really even joy. It's just like pleasure. It's pleasure.
At the expense of others.
At the expense of others, totally. So
all right.
Okay. Chapter 3 is the Wildwood. It's now winter. So what we learn as we go through this is that we jump through time pretty quickly. Excuse me. So it's now winter. And like most mammals, Rat really, doesn't necessarily hibernate all of winter, but he's very sleepy. He wants to take things slow. He wants to just like prop his feet up in his nice chair by the fireplace and just snooze. Mole would like to go and visit Badger in the Wildwood. And Rat is like, we really, he's somebody who hates society. Like, you don't go find him, like he finds you type of thing. And Mole is like, well, I just want to go see him, and Rat's like, well, then you'd have to go in the Wildwood. Mole says, well, you said the Wildwood isn't so bad. And Rat's like, but like, not yet. It's not time yet. And I kind of get the idea that it's one of those things like when you tell a kid that they shouldn't do something, it makes them want to do it more. You tell them that something is dangerous and forbidden, and they're just going to want to do it more. And I think that's kind of what Rat is doing here with Mole. He's told him that the Wildwood is not so bad, but they've never gone there in the months and months that they've been together, because it's also not so good. It's not a safe place, but he's telling him it's not so bad. It's just not time to go yet, so that maybe he'll sort of a last ditch effort of trying to keep Mole from going. But there's one evening that Rat is like, he's really sleepy and he basically falls asleep. There is sort of this like interjection type of thing where for a couple of pages, he's just reminiscing about summer and the smell of all the flowers and all the colors and then the fall and how beautiful all that is. And now it's winter. And Rat is there dozing in the armchair by the fire, and Mole determines he's going to go in the Wildwood by himself. he's decided he knows enough now that he can go into the wildwood by himself, and he's going to find Badger. So he heads out, and he's going along, he's headed into the wildwood, and at first it's like everything's just fine, but then it turns into sort of like the old Snow White moment. You know, she's running through, if you remember, like what is it, 1932 Snow White, Disney Snow White, she's running through the woods, and suddenly like all these faces are popping out at her, and it's just terrifying. And he's having one of those moments. It says, then the faces began. It's very still. It's suddenly gotten very dark. And then all the faces begin. There's these faces poking out at him from holes. There's these different shapes, and they just look menacing, evil, hard-eyed, and sharp. And then whistling begins. Okay, so we can paint the picture. It's like it's gotten really dark. It's really still. He's just walking through the forest. And then these faces start peering at him. And then the sounds start happening. There's whistling and trilling, and then there's pattering, like there's feet coming after him. Okay, so then the pattering begins. He thought it was only falling leaves at first, and then it grew to where he knew it was like animals running and running hard, and he's just to the point that he's completely terrified. And it's in that moment that he realizes that Rat had been trying to shield him. It says he'd been trying to shield him from the terror of the wildwood. Like up to that point, they just called it the wildwood, but it's like the terror of the wildwood. It's really scary. And then we kind of go back and we see that Rat, he's just been dozing, but then he wakes up and he sees that Mole is not there. He looks all around for him, and he's like, oh my gosh, Mole's not here. And I think that he realizes Mole has gone into the wildwood. And so that's exactly where he heads.
Yeah, he goes out and looks at his tracks.
Yes.
And he's like, oh, that's what I was afraid of.
Exactly. But I love this. So he sees that Mole has headed towards the wildwood. So he heads back into his house. He straps on his belt that has his cudgel and his pistol and all these things. And he heads into the wildwood. And of course, he's experiencing all the same thing that Mole has experienced, of the faces and the sounds and the whistling. But it says that they actually die away as he comes in, because he's somebody that comes in with confidence and knowledge, and he's prepared with his weapons. And I think that that is a great lesson too. It's across the board, like with everything, right? Fear diminishes as we are more knowledgeable about everything. And our competence in areas leads to so much less fear. And the things that would scare us, they die away, because we understand that there's almost no reason to be afraid of them. As we've talked about before, so Mole kind of like made that big mistake with the oars and the boat and stuff, and Rat was very patient and kind with that. And it's the same thing here. Mole made another big mistake. He thought he knew, he thought he could do it, and he wasn't prepared. He didn't know. And Rat kind of does the same thing. He's like, you shouldn't have gone and done it, Mole. I did my best to keep you from it. And he says there are 100 things one has to know, which we understand all about, and you don't as yet. Like, we understand because we've lived here our whole lives, you know? And so this is something that is natural to us now, but you can't understand it unless you've been here and you've learned, and so it will come.
Yeah, I think Rat is showing too, again, what a great teacher he is.
Yeah.
He doesn't get on him, you know. He's like, probably like, oh, you were scared enough. That was enough punishment. But,
right. Let that suffice. But just understand that like other animals are able to do it because they know and they've learned, and I'm going to teach you now that you're ready to really learn, right? And I do think it's funny too, because Mole was like, I'm sure Toad would come and not be afraid. And Rat's like, he would never step foot in here.
One thing I think though is interesting is that Mole, now that Rat is there, is like, I can handle this now because my friend's here. So he
Right.
feels safer. He feels better, right? Well, because my Rat knows what to do.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, like, how much easier is it to deal with situations when you have like a friend or a loved one like with you? You know what I mean?
100%. I feel like that's kind of how we're built as people, is when we have hard situations, we need somebody in our corner. We need someone. And I feel like that's a lot of what Brene Brown talks about all the time.
Yes.
Is like someone who's going to be there with us in our shame and not judging us, not our shame, but like our vulnerable moments.
Yes.
You know, and that's exactly what it is for Mole. He's very vulnerable, and Rat's there in his corner, and he's able to do it now.
Yeah.
He's able to handle it and walk through it. So Mole hurts his leg. Rat's like, oh, you just have like the worst luck. We've got to keep pushing through. We've got to keep going. You know, they've been at this for several hours. So Rat is helping Mole like bandage up his leg. He's kind of like digging through the snow and all this stuff. And all of a sudden he starts dancing a jig because he has found a door scraper. And there they are in the middle of the woods. And Mole's like, why are you so happy? Okay, so somebody dropped a door scraper. Rat's like, don't you get it?
You don't know what that means?
Yeah. And Mole's like, nope. And a little bit later, they find a doormat.
Yes.
And now Rat is like, yes, you know? And Mole still is going, why do you feel like this doormat is talking to you? What do you think this doormat is telling you? I think that you are crazy. And Rat's like, basically, where there's a doormat, there's a door, you know? And they find the door, they knock on it, and well, they find that there's a little sign on the door. And the sign says, the name of the occupant of this house that they have now found in the middle of the wood where they're absolutely freezing. And the name is Mr. Badger.
Yeah.
So they have accidentally stumbled across his house.
Yeah, I love that. Like, Mole just does not get it. And he's like complaining, like, why would somebody leave garbage out here? Why would this, like, you know, the door scraper or whatever? Why is this out here to hurt somebody? You know, and Rat's just like, really?
Yeah. Come on.
Where there's a door scraper, there's a door.
Yes.
Where there's a doormat, there's a door. Like, where there's a door, there's a house with people.
Yes. Exactly.
It's funny. And I love this too. That it says Mole. I mean, I wrote down Mole falls backwards in surprise, praising Rat. Like, you're so smart. And I just wanted to tell you, this is so funny. Presley, at Christmas, on Christmas Eve, David's mom was asking all the kids, everybody in the room, what their favorite present as a child that they received at Christmas was. And David's brother Joey said, a Ninja Turtle van. And Presley loves Ninja Turtles. And she heard that and she goes like this. And she fell over backwards and just like laid there like a stone. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like, I mean, it was very funny. Like, she's like, a Ninja Turtle van? And it just reminded me of that. He said he falls backwards in surprise, like
fall over backwards.
Like,
that is so funny. I wish you had gotten a video of it. That is really funny.
She literally fell backwards on the carpet and just like went stone cold with her eyes like huge. And it was so cute. I'm like, if we could ever find her a Ninja Turtle van.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love it.
It was funny. Yeah.
So just the end of this chapter is just they knock on the door, they ring the doorbell, and they're just waiting for somebody to respond.
Yes. Finally, they're going to be rescued. Chapter 4 is that Mr. Badger?
Yes.
Because they're meeting Mr. Badger. Duh. See? Okay. So Badger, how do you think Badger comes to the door? Is he thrilled to see them?
I think he's very grumpy.
Yes.
Because first of all, he doesn't know who it is. He doesn't like visitors. And so of course he doesn't realize it's going to be somebody he knows. So he's going to be really, really grumpy.
Yeah. So he comes to the door mad. He's saying, if this happens again, And when Rat says who they are, he's like, he like his tone just changes dramatically. So he invites them in and says, it's not really a good night to be outside as a small animal. Rat's probably like,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
we're
And I love
aware.
that. Yeah, exactly. But I love that Kenneth Grahame uses the word paternally. That's how Badger addresses them. It's not a good night for little animals to be out. Like in a very fatherly tone.
Yes.
And like, come on, guys.
Yes. So he takes them into the kitchen and he has like a fire and he has supper and there's food everywhere. I mean, I just picture this as like, oh, what a nice little house. Like I think of like, yes, a castle that's just cozy and has food everywhere, big table of food. So he goes and gets them new clothes and slippers so they can take off their wet clothes. And then he continues to bandage Mole's leg. So once they're warm, then he invites them to eat and nobody says anything because their mouths are full. And here's another one, an etiquette. I'm not real. I mean, I don't know. This is people etiquette, but Mole and Rat have their elbows on the table, but Badger doesn't care about manners. He's just like, whatever. So he listens to them. He's not judging them.
Well, can I interject right here?
Yes.
Because like right along with this, I underline this because, yeah, like you say, the talking with their mouth full and elbows on the table, Badger didn't care about that. As he did not go into society himself, he had gotten an idea that these things belonged to the things that didn't really matter. Because it's true. Now, there are some social graces that you should probably observe, but in the long run, do they really matter, especially when you're like freezing cold and starving? Nope. But then in parentheses, the author says, we know, of course, that he was wrong and took too narrow a view because they do matter very much, though it would take too long to explain why.
I actually highlighted that too.
Yeah. I love that because I think it really is Kenneth Grahame saying it doesn't really matter that much. These are things that we have made such a big deal about as humans. And he says, we could talk about it, but it would take too long to explain because really we can't explain why.
Right. And later in the book, we'll talk about how he talks about how things, etiquette and standards change depending on the situation. Yes. So these animals are tired and hungry and Badger is kind and generous and he gives them a pass. He's like, hey, I know the situation. Put your elbows on the table, eat with your mouth, talk with your mouth full. I don't care.
Yeah.
Yeah. He says to Badger, being kind and generous to them is more important than them having manners. So after dinner, Badger takes them back to the fire and he's asking about Toad, but he wants to know if there's any news from the river. It's his like way in, right?
Sort of way about it. Yeah.
Is there any news about the river? But really, I want to know about Toad. And Rat says, oh, things are bad. Toad had another crash last week. He refuses to hire a driver. He's had 7 cars and 7 crashes. He's been in the hospital 3 times. He's had to pay a lot of fines.
Yeah.
And Rat says, Toad is rich, but he's not a millionaire. Like there's an end to his wealth and we're afraid he's going to find it. And that as friends that they need to intervene or Toad is going to ruin his life or die, get himself killed. And Badger says, well, here's an etiquette thing. We can't do anything now because it's winter. Yes. But when summer comes, we're going to have to force him to be reasonable. Yes. And, they want to intervene, but because of animal etiquette, they can't because it's winter. It's not seasonally appropriate.
Yes, they can't do anything strenuous or heroic or even moderately active during the off season of winter. I love it. I'm totally going to make a post just with the animal etiquette we find in here.
I just heard somebody say, I think it was a coach. I think it was, anyways, that January is the time when we set all these resolutions, but it's also cold in winter. And so it's like, we want to like hibernate and relax. And so it's like the opposite. Like
Yeah.
we're expecting ourselves to be able to go outside and exercise or whatever, but it's like not what we want to do. And then the other thing I heard recently, I thought this was really funny. It kind of goes along with that, is like your brain is constantly telling you need to change. You need to like do better. You need to make changes. You need to do this, right? There's something wrong with you. And then as soon as you start making those changes, your brain goes, oh, never mind. Oh, this was a bad idea.
It's
like,
really
because your brain
true.
doesn't want to change. So it's
No.
like getting on you and shooting you down, but then it's just funny.
Yeah, you have to face that battle within yourself and decide which side is going to win.
Yeah. Am I going to
So,
change or not? But yeah, so it's like it's winter. They're just off. They're
yeah.
resting. You know, they can't go talk to him. Badger notices that Rat's falling asleep, and Mole is feeling at home because he's underground. So he's like, I'm not tired. This is great. He finds this house like energizing. So then he takes Rat and Mole to a room. Half of it is a storeroom, and then the other half has 2 beds. And they go to sleep, and Badger had told them, just stay in bed. Like, don't worry about getting up early in the morning. So they do that. They just kind of sleep in. And then in the morning, when they come out to the kitchen, there's 2 hedgehogs eating oatmeal. So another example of how Badger is just generous, right? One of them says that they had gotten stuck in the snow on the way to school, and they'd knocked on Badger's door because everybody knew that he would help them. And they say that they tell him that Badger's still in his study. And what is he doing in his study? He's resting.
He's resting. He's
sleeping.
sleeping.
It's winter.
Yeah.
So then the doorbell rings, and Billy is the hedgehog. He goes to get the door, and it's Otter, who is super excited to see Rat. Everybody on the riverbank had been worried about him because he basically disappeared, right?
Yeah.
But Otter was like, I figured you ended up at Badger's house.
Yeah, I love that he says, I knew that when people were in any fix, they mostly went to Badger, or else Badger got to know of it somehow. So that's why I came here. I love that.
Yeah, he's like, and then he ran into a rabbit on the way that told him that that's where they were. Well, he cuffed their ears.
Yeah.
And then the rabbit told him, like, he had to threaten them.
I think it's really funny that the rabbits are sort of some of the antagonists in this story. They're kind of the little demons. They're the bad guys.
And the rabbit had said that they were out hunting Rat and Mole. So like these animals were doing all this scaring on purpose. I mean, it's not in their imaginations. They were out there.
Yeah.
You know. Okay. So Badger comes into the kitchen and invites Otter to stay for lunch. And he sends the hedgehogs home with money. Which is really funny. Like, what are they going to do with that? And during lunch, then Mole and Badger get to kind of connect about living underground. Mole's just really liking his house because it feels at home to him. And then I like this, how Badger says, if you just want more space, you just dig another room.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be nice?
It's so convenient. I know.
Yeah. And he says, you never have to worry about weather ruining your house. It's great. So after lunch, Badger takes Mole on a tour of his house and explains that this used to be a human city and that the humans had left some things that he was using as his house. And he says, nobody knows what happened to the people, but they left. And so we came back. He's like,
yeah,
over our home.
I thought that was really good. He's like, people come, they stay for a while, they flourish, they build, and they go. But we remain. We're always here. We were here before they were here, and then we were here after. We wait, we're patient, and back we come. And so it will ever be.
Let's see. When Badger and Mole come back to the kitchen, then Rat he's pacing back and forth. He doesn't like being underground. Mole and Badger are super happy, and Rat is like, I'm ready to go. Let's leave. And Otter says he's going to walk them home to keep them safe. Oh, and then Badger tells him about the tunnel in his house that takes them almost home. so they can like
Yeah.
basically get home
Like
underground.
avoid the woods. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And so once they go through the tunnel, so once they get out of the tunnel, they're almost at the edge of the wildwood, and he like covers it back up with dead leaves so that nobody can see this little entrance. And so Otter takes them across the field away from the scary wildwood. And Mole, he realizes like, this is where I'm supposed to be. Like, I liked being underground, but I'm really happy being with Rat. So yes, Otter is the new character, basically. He's a good friend because he takes care of them, walks them home, makes sure they're safe. And Mole's trip into the wildwood was kind of a really big learning experience for him. Like, he learned how scary the wildwood was and to listen to Rat, and also that what's around the river is adventurous enough for him. He doesn't need to like sacrifice being safe to go away from home. And
and it talks about, they get back to Rat's house, and they hear the river, and it's something that's always there. It's very steady, and it's something that has its own surprises, but nothing to bring fear or amazement is the word that they use. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So perfect.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop.
Yes.
Apparently we are very verbose.
I think we are. But the thing is, part of what makes it a classic is that there's so much to talk about. And one of my favorite things that somebody said about like what makes a classic is that it continues to say what it's trying to say even after the book has finished, because it has so much to say. And I think that we find that in all these chapters that we talk about in all the books, there's so much to talk about because the authors just, it's dense. It's dense with their thoughts and their observations. And I think that even with what we could have talked about so much more. We could have really dug into it. But yeah, anyway, it's a good start. Lots of good stuff. Okay. So what have you been reading lately?
I'm reading Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Yes, I'm trying to read a chapter a day, and I thought I'd read it before, but as I'm reading it, and I've watched the movie, but as I'm reading, I'm like, oh, this does not ring a bell. So I don't know. Apparently I have a really bad memory, or I don't know, but I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's good. It's like a surprise. So yeah, how fun.
So I'm probably not that far, like a third of the way through, but I'm reading. Yeah, I'm just trying to read a chapter a day most days. But everybody knows what Little Women is. So that's what I'm reading.
But it's a classic for a reason. So how wonderful. Enjoy.
Yes. It reminds me of that book that a book that my mom read to us when I was little, All of a Kind Family. It's kind of what it reminds me of. It's very similar. Or like, just the girls. I love that the girls fight.
They're so real. I think they're so real.
Oh my gosh. Like the part I just read. Oh my gosh, I'd kill her. Was it Beth or Amy? One of the two. When she burns Joe's book that she'd been writing stories in for years. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Can you even imagine if it happened in your house?
No, like that's one that I burn inside every time I read that or see that part in the movie.
I know.
How do you even move on after that?
Poor Joe. Like, and what were you thinking? Anyways.
Like the lowest of the low. Awesome. How fun. Yeah. Okay. I just finished a book called The Maid by Kimberly Cutter. And turns out there's a lot of books called The Maid. This one was written in 2011, and it's about Joan of Arc. And I've been a huge fan of Joan of Arc my entire life. And I've read a lot of nonfiction about her. And at one time I was even able to like read all the court scripts, from her quote unquote trials that were just so awful. It makes you so sick. But anyway, I think that Kimberly Cutter did a fantastic job. It's one that it's very, very heavy. It's very graphic in the battle scenes. It's also the 1400s. It's the, it's the 15th century. So it's like such a harsh, rough time. I think of course, it's during the 100 Years' War, and France and England are just at war all the time. And the brutality is unreal. And yet it was real. Like, that's what these people lived through. Just constant, if you live to grow old at that period of time, I don't know, you might be living in a cave or something. Like, people just didn't live a long time. Either they were murdered or, there's illness or whatever, but so many people just wiped out. Anyway, but Joan of Arc, it was an amazing story. And she really tried to make her very human. Well, so, you're like, okay, here's this very real person who just had to do this very heroic and amazing thing. And so, yeah, it was great. I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. I wish I don't know. I'd like to read more historical fiction like that, about people I don't know much about.
Yeah.
You know a lot about everybody, but
I don't. She just happens to be one that I have always been very fascinated by. So
that's cool.
And there are skeptics. There are totally skeptics to her story, but I just think, like, if you carefully study all these things about her, like, I completely believe her story. So yes.
Awesome.
Anyway.
What was it called again?
It's just called The Maid.
The Maid. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because the whole reason I even found it was because I was looking for the one that you had read.
Yeah. That's funny.
But this one's by Kimberly Cutter. So yeah. We are so happy you joined us for this episode. We hope you will join us next week as we discuss The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame, chapters 5 through 8. If you have suggestions for books we should read and discuss, please email us at thebestbookspodcast@gmail.com. We would love it if you would leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share our podcast with your friends. We want to inspire and encourage as many people as we can to read out of the best books.
As Thoreau says, read the best books first, or you may not have a chance to read them at all. See you next week.